discuss the actions and the dynamics among two such parties whose positions are critical for the future of the Korean Peninsula, South Korea and China. So we know that before and after Hanoi, South Korean government's priority is clear: to push for more consensus between U.S. and DPRK and to facilitate more dialogues between the two countries. However, on the other hand, China has been much more dormant or silent compared to, say, a year ago on the development on the Korean Peninsula. There could be many explanations for China's actions or inactions and its positions, and we're hoping that our guest here today, Dr. Lee, could provide us with his analysis. And in particular, we'd like to hear what South Korea's policy has been in engaging China at this critical time and what the implications are for the U.S. ROK alliance. So as a brief introduction for Dr. Lee, Dr. Lee is a director of the Center for China Studies at the Sejong Institute in Seoul. Previously, he was a director of the Department of Unification Strategy at the Sejong Institute. So he has a very long list of publications on China and the Korean Peninsula, U.S. China relations and the Korean Peninsula. I'm not going to read the list of his many publications, but Dr. Lee is a graduate from Grinnell College, where he spent the happiest 4 years of his life. He's also a graduate from Harvard University and the Tsinghua University in China. He received his PhD in political communication and global communications in Chinese at Tsinghua University, right? He was a 2013 to 2014 Pentech Fellow of the Stanford University's Shorenstein Asia Pacific Research Center. And currently, he's also a senior research fellow, non-resident at the Center for Korean Peninsula Studies at the Peking University. So Dr. Lee, the floor is yours. Please enlighten us. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Yun, for inviting me. So any talk we should start from our guru, Steve Jobs. And Steve Jobs said that people who know what they are talking about don't need PowerPoint. So today, that means that I need some PowerPoint. Next, please. So today is Monday, right?
Today is Monday.
Monday, right. Okay. I know for some people, Monday is your bad hair day. For me, Monday is my bad English day. As a non-native speaker of English, my English suffers on Monday. So that's why I need a PowerPoint to guide me through this ordeal of speaking in English. Next, please. So I need some PowerPoint, and I was told to talk about the events between China, North Korea, China, South Korea after the Hanoi summit. But then I think we also need some background coming to the Hanoi summit and what happened, that events that leading up to the Hanoi summit. So I will include that. Next, please. So I think the big question that I want to lead today's talk is the mystery surrounding China's keeping silence. As you may remember, for some mysterious reason, for the last 1 year, China has been kind of very silent on this North Korean saga. Hello, Sandy. Normally, as an analyst who research on China-North Korea relations, the usual saying goes that China is the country that has the largest influence on North Korea. China has the most influence on North Korea. But then for the last 1 year, China has been largely silent on the North Korean drama. And it's very interesting and strange because China claims that it's a party to the North Korean war. China claims that it vowed to play an active role, 积极的角色, and demand to be included in the Declaration for Peace and ending the Korean War. But then why China, in actuality, sits on the fence while all this drama between Kim Jong-un and Trump, they have been in unfolding. So why? So this is kind of a way of introducing my talk. And I think when we get to the answer of this question, I think your lunchtime is up and you are free to go back to your office, I think. Next slide, please. And it's all the more interesting because as you may or may not have noticed for the last 1.5 years, China's strategy on the North Korea has a very nuanced shift. That is that when it comes to North Korea denuclearization, actually China prioritized its securing its influence on North Korea over denuclearization, which the Trump administration has been pursuing. Why? Because it is China's reaction when China sensed that possibility of resolving the Korean Peninsula issue, North Korean nuclear issue, was increasingly driven by, not by China, but first by South Korean President Moon Jae-in and also by U.S. President Trump. So, in the past, all this North Korean drama was driven by China, and whenever something happens about North Korean nuclear issue, we look for China. Where is China? But then, for the last 1.5 years, we didn't look for China because Trump bypassed China to directly engage North Korea. Trump does not need China anymore because now it can directly reach out to North Korea and talk to Kim Jong-un. So China was kind of sidelined. Probably you heard about China was sidelined or China was being passed by all these different actors. So when China sensed that it was sidelined, then China made a very subtle shift to secure China's influence on North Korea over denuclearization. And the most actions that China manifested to do that is to field summits with Kim Jong-un 1 time, twice, 3 times, and 4 times. In the mere span of 10 months, Xi Jinping staged 4 times of summits with Kim Jong-un to demonstrate China's influence on North Korea. Next slide, please. So it's all the way more interesting why China, despite all this purported influence on North Korea, has been so quiet in actuality. And usually, as an analyst on the scene, my approach is that what is China's policy priorities when it comes to North Korea? And as many of you know, China has 3 goals when it comes to North Korea. Number 1, China does not want war on the Korean Peninsula. More explicitly speaking, China does not want U.S. to invade North Korea. And 2 years ago, we are on the brink of war with fire and fury by Trump. And then we are heading into dramatic shift to the dialogue mode. So we shifted from close to the war situation to dialogue and negotiation situation. This fits with China's interest, national interest. So this is a good thing for China. China also wants to resolve the North Korean issue through not by beheading of Kim Jong-un or military commander or special forces, but through dialogue and negotiation. For the last 1.5 years, this is what we have been watching, right? Kim Jong-in and Trump, I have a bigger nuclear button on my desk. This tournament of nuclear, who has the bigger nuclear buttons on the desk, but then they shift it to dialogue. And because it also secures the stability of Kim Jong-un regime. So this is also very nicely fits with China's national interest. And the whole process of a dialogue and negotiation is for what? It's for denuclearization. So when we look at it and analyze the situation from China's national interest perspective, all the things that we have seen for the last one years or one and a half years nicely fits perfectly with China's national interest. What that means is that China doesn't have to stick its neck because anyway, things are flowing well, perfectly fitting into China's national interest. Next slide, please. And interestingly, South Korea wants all of the three that I just mentioned. It wants denuclearization, it wants dialogue, it wants peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula. So here, China's interest and South Korea's interest, they overlap with each other. In addition, both South Korea and China, they're asking Washington to be much more flexible when in terms of dealing with North Korea. Both Beijing and Seoul, they want to see the reduction of sanctions commensurate with North Korea's actions to the denuclearization. And Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi demanded it in a much more explicit manner. And both Seoul and Beijing, for the last 1.5 years, Seoul reduced the number of joint military drills that they conducted annually with the United States, which China wants as well. So these things are areas where China's interest and South Korea's approach kind of overlap with each other. Next, please. So the answer to China's silence is that in Korean we call 손 안 대고 코 풀기. In English, it is blowing one's nose without using hands. I think there should be a much more sexier words to express this, but I just couldn't Google it properly. So if you know a much nicer way to put it in Chinese, this does not even capture the spirit of this expression. So someone who is a linguistic specialist of Korean language, please get back to me so that I can use it in my next presentation. It's like, you're blowing your nose, but you don't have to use your hands. Someone kind of help you. What that means is that South Korea has been doing, from Chinese perspective, South Korea has been doing what China wants to see, in a way. So that's why China has been kind of with its arms folded and sitting back and doing nothing, because everything just flows the way China wants to see it. But then China doesn't have to blow its nose, because South Korea helping it blowing its nose. But anyway, please help me with coming up with much more nicer words than this one. Next, please. But then that's not the end of it. There are additional advantages for China to keep silence on the North Korean affair for the last 1.5 years. Because the flow of negotiation between North Korea and the United States has been unfolding in a way that we have witnessed a weakened coordination between South Korea and U.S., who are allies to each other. And from China's national interest, China wants to see weakened alliance relationship between South Korea and the United States. That's good from China's perspective. And China also does not want the military drills between the US and South Korea, which the two countries conduct against North Korea's threat. But then China has been also very angry and upset whenever Washington and Seoul conduct joint military drills because it has quite advanced military assets involved, and it has a capability to cover China's eastern coastal areas, and where China's military assets information could be could be captured by the U.S. and South Korea assets. That's not the end of it. The collapse of Hanoi Summit, in a way, from Chinese perspective, collapse of Hanoi Summit was, in a way, show that without me, without Beijing, Washington, you alone cannot solve North Korean issue. You need me. So I allowed you to dance along with North Korea, but see, in the absence of Beijing, you failed. That's where, in a way, of the kind of a spirit that when you go to Beijing and talk with the Chinese interlocutors, it's kind of they share this kind of sentiment with me. So again, even though China was not involved, but then people are awakened to China's importance in dealing with North Korea. And that's not the end of it. For the last few years, Xi Jinping's government has been raising China's diplomatic profile. And if you watch the CCTV, China state television, you hear a lot about Chinese solution, 中国方案. That is that, for the last 6 decades after the end of World War II, the U.S.-led international order has come to a more or less, kind of its own limitation. The world is becoming much more complex, and China is rising. And Xi Jinping's government is proposing a ways to solve international conflicts, for example, North Korean issue. So when you watch Chinese TV, you hear about 中国方案, Chinese solution. There is Chinese solution to international affairs, including North Korean affairs. For example, when it comes to North Korea, China proposed dual freeze, solution. That means that North Korea stops missile and nuclear tests, and Washington stops joint military drills with South Korea. Dual freeze as a way to approach the North Korean nuclear issue. And this has been, in a way, if you look at the results so far, what has been accomplished. So China accomplished its stated diplomatic goal. Very interesting. Without doing anything, without using even one single finger. So everything so far I said nicely fits with China's national interest. That's why China didn't have to do anything, just sitting back and watch the show and collapse of the Hanoi Summit. So there is a joke that after the collapse of the Hanoi Summit, 2 countries on this planet smiled. One is Japan. I know a friend of mine who is a Japanese journalist watching the live stream from some offices in Washington. So one is Japan and the other is China. Japan did not want to see the success of the Hanoi Summit, and China didn't want to see the success I mean, they say they want to see the success of Hanoi Summit, but then let us be a little bit more frank, okay? They don't want to see the success of summit without China's participation, okay? So this is, next slide, please. And after assessing all the things that what I have just shared with you, China concludes that it made the right approach in dealing with the North Korean issue because the reasons that I just shared with you, everything nicely fits with the China's national interests. And China also defends that it couldn't afford to play a role in the North Korean drama because now there is also China's justification or complaint in going here. When we talk with the Chinese interlocutor these days, they also offer this kind of explanation. Oh, it's because U.S. was reluctant to see China participating. U.S. wants to see this as a drama, dual drama between Trump and Kim Jong-un, and Trump does not want to see Xi Jinping meddling in this drama, right? So if you remember, Xi Jinping at least 3 times publicly complained that, when Trump saw kind of hardening attitude of Kim Jong-un, Trump publicly complained that Xi Jinping might be behind, influencing Kim Jong-un's hardened attitude. Number 2 is that, Chinese interlocutors also told me that, you South Korea, also did not ask our help to play a role, so we could not get in without, getting invitation. Number 3, you know what? Actually, North Korea frankly, did not want us to, jump in this game either. So these are the reasons. And that's not the end of it. Surprisingly, after the collapse of the Hanoi Summit, the name of China was not mentioned, was not blamed. Usually, when things go wrong in terms of the North Korean nuclear issue, we habitually point our fingers to China. That is China not doing enough about North Korean issue. Or that is China doing, pulling influence behind Kim Jong-un. But then everyone saw that, Xi Jinping was not involved behind Hanoi Summit. When Kim Jong-un's train was going through for 30 days, the train for 30 days to Chinese territory to Hanoi, Kim Jong-un's train did not stop over in Beijing. So Xi Jinping's alibi is very clean. I didn't talk with Kim Jong-un. The failure of Hanoi Summit is all your fault. So this time, the media, including those medias in Washington, did not point their fingers to China. So this is also good thing for China as well. And also, another complexity that we could add is obviously, now we see ongoing trade war between U.S. and China does not want to be seen using the North Korean factor in its dealings with the United States in a trade war. Next, please. So, all in all, Beijing believes that the collapse of the Trump-Kim summit in Hanoi is a warning to the relevant stakeholders, Washington and Seoul, Tokyo, Moscow, about the importance of China in its mediating role or traditional leverage in North Korean nuclear affair, which has been kind of sidelined by Washington and Seoul for the last 1.5 years. Next slide, please. So now I'm getting into a little bit about South Korea-China current relations between South Korea. Normally, in Washington, it's you talk about China-North Korean relations. But I heard that you seldom talk about China-South Korea relations in Washington. So I just want to share. And this is a complex story, so I'll make some simplifications. South Korea's China analyst like me, we see that the relationship between China and South Korea are tremendously different before the third incident and after the third incident. You know, that is, what is this?
Theater high altitude aerial defense.
She said terminal, you said theater. Which one is correct? Theater. Terminal. You know, even in Washington, in small this room, we see disagreement. Yoon, what is the answer to T? What does it mean?
It's just sad. Let's move on.
It's just sad. So sad is kind of makes us sad, so we'll just move on. But you know, we know that this is like an advanced missile defense system, made by U.S. But it deployed in South Korea, right? It's an advanced military asset, but it was deployed in South Korea, and its radar is so powerful that it could, see the ICBM assets hidden behind the mountain Changbai and other areas. So China was very upset. So China retaliated, but then China did not retaliate against Washington, but China retaliated against Seoul. Just like Huawei incident. Huawei incident is between US and China, but Huawei, Beijing retaliated against Canada, not against Washington, right? So, at the time, China retaliated against South Korea in terms of economy, and they also used public opinion warfare. And it hurt so much on both sides between China and South Korea. At the time, I told my friends back in Washington, even though it's okay probably for you to use some sort of economic retaliation, but don't use media warfare that hurts and drives the people's hurts feelings on both Chinese and South Koreans. If you do that, there's no way of going back because people feel really hurt, and the public sentiment, government is very difficult to control the people public sentiment. But then China actually embarked on the public warfare against South Korea. And also South Korean people heard about, they awakened the so-called China threat. Oh, we thought China is our friend, but then look how China retaliated against us. So that, South Korea-China relationship was, if you look at it, before that incident, let's say it's, they used to call it honeymoon period. If you remember Park Geun-hye administration, honeymoon period, right? So let's say, call it, it's like A plus period between South Korea and China. And there are two groups of South Korea analysts on China. Number one is that if we resolve the third incident, the two-country relationship will go back to A plus relationship. That's one group. And number two is that even if we resolve the third issue, but then the public sentiment on both sides got so soured against each other, so you cannot go back to the honeymoon period again. It's like, husband and wife, they have quite a severe quarrel, and then they resolve the differences, but then they cannot go back to the honeymoon period. Does it make sense? People who married, does it make sense? But anyway, I belong to the second group that the third incident was so destructive in terms of relationship of South Korea and China. We cannot go back to the honeymoon period anymore. Now we are entering a new normal period between South Korea and China. And so far, it turns out to be that I am kind of right. That we, even though we technically put aside that issue, that we are still not enjoying the honeymoon period anymore. I think in the past we used to be A plus. Now I think it's about B plus or B period, and this is just new normal period that we will just see. And before I come in here, I just did a small survey with my students that I teach about Chinese politics, and I just quiz them on your preference about China. I gave them a different terminology like China, Chinese people, Chinese companies, and Chinese government. And in the order of least likability, they like China. They like Chinese people a little bit less. They like Chinese companies a little bit less, like Huawei. They least like Chinese government, according to the Chinese students that I surveyed. Next slide, please.
And pandas.
Yep, pandas. Pandas. I asked them, what are the images that just, when you hear China, what's the vocabulary that pops into your brain? And they told me that China, oh, Communist Party. China, oh, socialism. So I asked them, what is the vocabulary that pops in when you hear the vocabulary word U.S., freedom, and democracy are the two words that pop in. It's an incomplete survey. I'm just beginning to enjoy. I'll do more surveys with a more number of students. I asked them, what is a negative image that when you hear the word China? And the number one was hiding. They told me that when I hear China, it's a country that is hiding something. That is hiding something, right? When I hear China, the word that pop in, the next one is greed. That is coming into the South Korean college students. When they hear the word United States, the first word, negative word that pop into their brain is supremacy. U.S. has suffering from supremacy complex. Like, I'm the superpower, you guys listen to me. And the number two word, not my opinion, by the way, it's just survey data. I love the United States. Survey data. I'm just sharing the survey data. What's the number two words that pop into your brain when you hear the U.S. negative image? Is hypocrisy. They told me the hypocrisy. But then I asked them, okay, so now the U.S. and China, they are competing against each other. So in the future, which country do you think we, South Korea, should choose? I asked them, and the sample size is very small, so don't take it at face value. I'll do more survey, but I just did it last week. And whopping majority of students, 19 students out of 25, these are all college students in Seoul area majoring in political science. 19 out of 25 students, they choose, South Korea should choose United States over China. And the number of students who said we should choose China over United States is only 3 students out of 25. Next. Oh, that's the end of I thought normally I display like 60 slides, but this time I just decided to show last one. What that means is that despite some anxiety about or uncertainty about the U.S.-South Korea alliance, my sense is that, and also I got the similar sense from other surveys in South Korea done by other institutions, is that I think in the foreseeable future, I think South Korea and the U.S. alliance will be the staying continuity for the foreseeable future, despite the rise of China. Even though China's economic power is particularly attractive, but there are some anxiety or feeling of perceiving China as a threat. Perception is rising in South Korea, particularly after the very sad incident. So I'll just stop here and entertain some questions or comments. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Lee, for a very lively discussion. I have to say you have great hair, and your English is great too. So I guess Monday doesn't really have a negative impact over your presentation, which is great. Well, I'm sure there are a lot of questions in the audience, but if I could take the liberty to ask you the first two questions. You mentioned that Beijing is pleased with the collapse of the Hanoi summit, and is pleased with the lack of progress, with the lack of do you need a pen? Substantive progress on the denuclearization dialogue. So my question is, do you think that Beijing was aware that the result of the Hanoi summit would be inconsequential, or it would be a failure before Kim Jong-un went to Hanoi? That's my first question. And the second question is, like you mentioned from your student survey, that overwhelming majority of the South Korean students, at least in this sample, is supportive of alignment choice that continues to be based on the alliance with the United States. So how does South Korea plan to tackle this China obstacle in the path towards denuclearization and potentially unification someday? What is the end game and how to get there from the South Korean perspective? Those are my two questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Yuan, for raising very good and challenging questions. And as I said at the beginning of my talk, English is not my native tongue. And some of friends from the media, if you find anything entertaining that you might tempted to write in your article, probably it's very likely that I misspoken. I ignore the subtlety because my English is not very good. So please double check before you write something in your article. I take it back when I said China was pleased. This is kind of occasions when my poor English just destroys the context. But I think it also, in a way, captures the simplicity, captures how China sees the game. If you look at this not as an idealistic peace-building endeavor, but more of a very realistic struggle or competition between China and the United States. Who owns the North Korean narrative? Who owns this game? Of course, China does not want to see its competitor win the game in the absence of China's help. So I think that's what I meant by China was, I shouldn't say, I take it back, please. I think China was rather, how should I say?
Content, complacent, or pleased?
I'll come back. I'll think about it. I'll give you the answer tomorrow, okay? But pleased is probably too strong words to use. It seems that China did not anticipate the collapse of the Hanoi summit because many of the analysts that I met, just like many people in Washington and Seoul they anticipated a modest success. And they also toyed the idea that after the modest outcome of success in the Hanoi summit, and China will be followed by Xi Jinping's visit to Pyongyang and also to Seoul, and China will pick up the track from that. And because if the Hanoi summit would have been successful, then China will be, have a freer hands to do something that it wants to do with North Korea. And if you remember, during the Kim Jong-un's fourth visit to Beijing and meeting with Xi Jinping in January this year, Kim Jong-un invited Xi Jinping to Pyongyang, and Xi Jinping agreed. And they plan to Xi Jinping planned to visit Pyongyang this year. So my sense was that China was planning to arrange Xi Jinping's visit to Pyongyang after the successful summit after the Hanoi. And South Korea's choice of the future relationship and how it could utilize the China card I think this is a very complicated question because if you remember during the Park Geun-hye administration in 2015, at the invitation of Xi Jinping, Park Geun-hye went to Beijing and stood right next to Xi Jinping in the military parade as the only leader of U.S. allies. And at that time, Xi Jinping really needed some countries who are relatively advanced and who are allies of the United States to shine the stage, because all the countries at the time who went to the military parade was more like a socialist countries of Putin or Central Asia. So Xi Jinping really needed some country that some have some international status. And South Korea, in a way, fit into that category. At that time, my understanding was that South Korea, despite Washington's frowning of Park Geun-hye going to attend the Beijing military parade, the calculation or the strategy was that Xi Jinping really needs China at this time. So if we helps China or helps China's face, international face this time, when we help China, when China needs help, then when South Korea needs China's help in the future, that is of course North Korean issue, then we could use China's help in the future. So South Korea, I think, in a way, used that Park Geun-hye's visit to China as a diplomatic insurance. We invest this diplomatic card first so that we could use China's help in the future when it comes to dealing with the North Korean issue. But then a few months later, North Korea conducted another nuclear test, and Park Geun-hye called Xi Jinping for emergency consultation. And as you all know, Xi Jinping didn't pick up the phone. So this is something happened when your strategies did not play out the way you anticipated. So I think that was, in a way, crushing moment or wake-up call together with the sad incident that South Korea kind of awakened to the status of China, how China could be or not could be helpful to when it comes to North Korean issue, including the future scenario of unification. And I think South Korea have not arrived any a concrete plan how China fits into this future South Korean scenario strategy about the North Korea and the unification yet. Maybe they have, but they have not shared with me. Maybe they have.
Maybe you'll find out, and when you find out, let us know.
All I'm saying here today is based on public information. I don't have any access to classified information. Okay?
That's a great disclaimer. Thank you. So with that, we'll open for questions and answers. So yes, sir, please. Yes, there's a mic. Please tell us who you are, and then
I'm Peter
say your
Humphrey,
question.
an intelligence analyst and a former diplomat. I'm wondering if this Russian approach to the problem would be welcomed by China, or whether they would view it as a kind of an unnecessary distraction, competing on our turf, in our baseball park. Do you have any sense of that? Do you think perhaps China and Russia cooperated for that meeting last month?
Could you define the Russia approach?
Russia invited Kim Jong-un to the Far East, Vladivostok. And they floated the proposal that Russia would build a light water reactor into North Korea, effectively recreating the Clinton initiative of 20 years ago. And in exchange for that, we would see a lessening of sanctions. In other words, Russia's trying to co-opt the so far failed initiative on the part of the Chinese. Would the Chinese view that as unwelcome competition, or do you think this was a conspiracy between China and Russia?
Any Russians here?
I don't want to. You can speak freely. There's no rushing here.
I don't want to hurt the feelings of Russian friends. I think China didn't mind Russia's approach because when it comes to economic leverage, China is 10 times larger than Russia's economy. So even though Russia wanted to indice when the collapse of Hanoi summit and everyone is kind of went back to their home and they're just scratching their heads and Russia just jumped in to the show. But then China didn't mind because number one, Russia cannot compete with China when it comes to influence on North Korea. Number two, it's just still better. At the time, people were worried about after the collapse of Hanoi summit, what if North Korea went straight into another nuclear testing or missile test? But then Kim Jong-un's choice was to travel to Russia. That is that Kim Jong-un is still using a diplomatic tools, not military means. So Kim Jong-un is still willing to sustain this nuclear drama through negotiating, dialogue, diplomatic means. So that was kind of an assurance that, Kim Jong-un is still in the game, even though the Hanoi summit was collapsed. And also, I think China was happy that Russia at the time proposed the resumption of six-party talks. Six-party talks, as we know, is hosted by China. So this is something that China took it as very pleasing. But then Russia's calculation was that when six-party talks was resumed, then Russia could jump in the game. So it's both a win for Russia and also a win for China.
And if I may just add to that, I don't think the Chinese took the Russian proposal or they perceived the Russian involvement as a competition, because after Kim Jong-un's visit to Russia, the Chinese had a list of humiliations that he had received during the trip, like the hotel that he was put into, that he cut the trip short, and Putin basically left him there and flew to China on the same day. So the sense that I get from my Chinese interlocutors is that they don't perceive a meaningful competition out of Russia. But then again, their analogy of the six-party talks is Walking Dead. That is, it's not really alive, but I don't think the Chinese are necessarily interested in resuming that either, but we could have a debate about that. Yes, ma'am. Here's a mic.
Hi, I'm Soyeon Kim from Radio Free Asia. So obviously China is the biggest country when it comes to trade and economic cooperation with North Korea. And about this sanction, many data shows that the trade between North Korea and China has been dropped dramatically since UN sanction started implementing. And but even though China has been saying that they are going to comply with this sanction and they are going to be more supportive for this denuclearization, but I don't think that China is going to let North Korea fall apart in the end. So how do you see this China's role in this sanction, and do you think they are going to keep complying with this sanction as strict as now or in the past?
Sanctions, huh?
Are they still implementing the sanctions as strictly as before?
If you remember the words of Mr. Donald Trump in April 2017, Donald Trump said that I'm willing to be soft on China on trade if China cooperates on North Korean nuclear issue with United States. So at the time, Beijing took it as a sign and that's why in 2017, China, in an unprecedented way, went out of its way to strangle North Korea's neck economic lifeline in 2017. And 1 year from that time now, Chinese analysts told me that we feel cheated because Donald Trump is increasing the trade war against us. He told us that if we cooperate on North Korea issue, he would be willing to be soft on trade issue, but then he didn't do it. So, but then when China was approached, holding out its hands to strangle North Korea's neck economic lifeline, I think he just barely touched the neck, not the used some force. So he just touched the neck, but didn't strangle or. But then I think it was a moment that that China, probably in the history of 26 years of North Korean issue, China went the closest to the direction that Washington wants to have when it comes to sanctions cooperation. And I think we are not going to go back to that period either, because now the trade war is, tension is increasing, and the Hanoi summit is collapsed, and I think we are on different page. And I think also China is not willing to sacrifice its influence on North. When you strangle North Korea's neck, then China will lose its influence on North Korea. So I don't think China will go back to that unusual, the strangling of North Korean sanctions by cooperating with the United States.
Related to that, there have been speculations about the South Korean economic engagement with North Korea, like the issue of Kaesong and the issue of tourism. What is the status of that?
Well, this is also, I think, going back to the what-if scenario. What if the Hanoi summit was successful, right? If Hanoi summit was successful, then Kim Jong-un goes much more close to the pledge or some specific actions of denuclearization, and then South Korea, with the explicit agreement with Washington that allow a reopening of Kaesong Industrial Complex and mountain Kumgang tourism within North Korea, and it's just beginning of a loosening of sanctions and some sort of as a conduit for North Korea's cooperation on denuclearization. But then I think because the Hanoi summit collapsed, and I think that the reopening of Kaesong and the mountain Kumgang tourism was postponed. But then, as you know, these days the North Koreans, the economic conditions of North Korea is going pretty bad. So I think both Washington and Seoul agreed to deliver some humanitarian aid to North Korea these days. So I think that's the current status of the economic cooperation. Still, it's very limited. It's not any substantive manner yet.
Great. Marvin, please. And wait for the mic. Thank you.
Thank you. Marvin Ott, Johns Hopkins, and the Wilson Center, formerly federal government. This is a hypothesis. This is a hypothesis. And
Chinese 40-minute spokesman usually answer. I don't answer hypothetical questions.
But
And
you're not
a
foreign
Chinese
ministry,
spokesman.
so it's one academic to another. We can deal with hypotheticals. The hypothesis, proposition, that Kim Jong-un and the North Koreans viscerally and basically hate the Chinese, and that, in fact, there is greater animus towards China in the DPRK than there is in the ROK. Is that correct, do you think? Or another way of putting it, is that the way the leadership in Seoul reads North Korea? And if so, what are the implications of that going forward in terms of us agreement on the peninsula?
Well, I don't want to use the word hate. I think I want to use much more softer word, mistrust. I think North Korea's mistrust about China is well defined and so well known. It's a public knowledge. And I think that, but then I think North Korea plays a realist politics. Except for China, who else North Korea has, right? In terms of economic aid, even a possible security umbrella guarantee, probably, if there is no United States, probably China can provide both economic aid and also security umbrella cover to North Korea. China is that country. So North Korea realized that. But having said that, I think that your question raises another question. That is that what the Trump has been doing for the last 2 years with North Korea, is it just Trump's part-time experimental diplomacy with Kim Jong-un, playing when he is not too busy with domestic politics, then he could go out and having some good time with Kim Jong-un, or he doesn't care whether it fails or succeeds. I think it has a much more significant geopolitical significance on the line, because it really has a potential to change the landscape of Northeast Asia. Particularly, I think the U.S. should be very clear about what it wants to do in Northeast Asia. And if U.S. priority is to go after China and track the rise or moderate the rise of China or China's perceived aggression in Northeast Asia, I think U.S. should decide the strategic value about North Korea. Whether North Korea right now belongs to the camp of China, but then North Korea could also belong to potential to move over to the camp of the United States. And North Korea's envoys, including in 1991, Kim Jong-un, when he met with Arnold Kent in Washington, D.C., he specifically mentioned that North Korea does not mind the presence of U.S. troops in South Korea. And North Korea is also many times in a private conversations that North Korea is willing to, this is my words, ditch China and come over to the U.S. League of this Team United States. So I think U.S. should decide at some point strategic value of North Korea, what it really wants to do, particularly when it comes to Northeast Asia's geopolitical rivalry with China.
Well, that's a great answer. Well, we know there is another country, Russia, who is also being discussed in that light, and the Chinese are quite concerned about that. Moving forward, wow, a lot of questions. It's gentleman over here.
Steve Winters, independent consultant. I think there's a group that is called the Seong-hyon Institute for Korea Studies. Have you ever seen any of their publications?
It's,
There is no institute called Seong-hyon Institute of Korean Studies.
there is, and Jung Ji-yong.
정지용.
Yeah, yeah.
OK. 那个是复旦大学的是吧？
Well, he carries two titles.
Well, in any case, in their publications, they're pushing the idea, first, the thing that's coming from Xi Jinping, an Asian community of values versus presumably Western community or some kind of Confucian community of values. But also, in concrete terms, they propose that the solution to the economic problems of North Korea is for North Korea to join the Belt and Road Initiative. And then you have Putin, who has various concepts of connectivity and rail lines going, through North Korea down to South Korea. And Putin is merging his Eurasian economic project with the Belt and Road. So this seems to be, I'm asking your opinion, this would seem to be exactly what is on the minds of people in Washington, D.C., and what they want to stop at all costs. And how would you suggest they stop it?
Well, maybe coming to the Korean Peninsula, what is South Korean government's attitude towards the Belt and Road, and what's the South Korean reaction to the Chinese proposal to build a community of common destiny?
Well, I think each country pursues its own national interests. As a believer of realist politics, when your interests converge each other, you could call it a community for shared interests for the time being. But when it comes to, I think, North Korea's integration to Belt and Road BRI projects, it has incentive on both China and North Korea. Of course, it's good for North Korea's economic development, but it's also good for China because it's a North Korea and China border. Dongbae, China's northeastern region, is one of the economic backwater, as you know, Liaoning, Heilongjiang, Jilin. It's the least developed 3 province because of the North Korean border, and there are some security threats. So when North Korea joins the economic blueprints and the projects and cooperates, and the security concerns diminishes, and China's northeastern province that borders North Korea, they can also economically achieve win-win. So if you go to border cities like Dandong or Jian, particularly Jian these days, they all built up the river road, the roads and bridges, and the realist prices are going up. So they're also expecting to see peace moment, really, because the peaceful solution of North Korea really benefits China's northeastern regions. So I think instead of seeing that not necessarily as that for United States we're gonna screw that plan, I think Washington could also think about how I can also jump in and the benefit as well, because as you know, the footwear maker Nike several years ago explored the possibility of building Nike factories in North Korea because it has cheap labor, very skilled labor skills, very cheap. And the number of shoes that North Korean factories could produce compared to number of shoes produced in China or Vietnam, I think North Korean workers could produce quite a quality products. So it's a way of, I think there are potential for U.S. companies jumping into this Northeast Asian, particularly China's northeastern region, and bordering the North Korean the regions where the cheap labors and the skillful labors are there. I think there is a room for win-win there.
But at this point, that would be in violation of the UN sanction resolutions.
At this point, yes.
Okay. And the South Korean attitude towards Belt and Road?
South Korea, I think South Korea has not officially joined there yet. But then I think South Korea, because South Korea has its own southern bound policy, northern bound policy, and they're not necessarily join the China's Belt and Road, but South Korea wants to use and connect between the two the plans together, not necessarily completely joining the South China's initiative.
Okay. So community of common projects.
Project, common interest and common benefits.
Common benefits. It's a great way. Jenny, please.
Hi, Jenny Tan from the Stimson Center. Sunny, you talked a little bit about your students' attitudes in the survey that you did, comparing the attitudes towards the U.S. versus China. But one of the advantages that China perceives that they got from the Hanoi summit, for instance, was the weakening of the U.S.-Korea alliance. What do you see as South Korean attitudes towards the U.S. in general overall, and have you seen this weakening of the alliance from the South Korean side? And what are those main complaints that they have? Is it about SMA? Is it about, do they see the U.S. as standing in the way of the peace process? Or what is really causing sort of the weakening of the U.S.-Korea alliance?
I think there are matters, things called facts and things called perceptions. I think the weakening of South Korea-U.S. alliance is rather a matter of perception rather than not facts. And particularly, it is used in South Korea polarized politics as domestic politics, because as you know, the current South Korean politics, government is more of progressive liberal government, and the opposition is a conservative camps, and conservative camp puts a high emphasis on U.S. South Korea alliance. So I think in very very vicious South Korea's domestic politics, the conservative camp wants to use every opportunity to undermine, portray the current progressive government and its approach, engagement toward North Korea as an act of undermining South Korea-U.S. alliance. But then I think whether that is true or not, I think I should spend some time in Washington, D.C. so to find out. Yeah, maybe I should spend some time in Washington, D.C.
Yes, please.
Yeah, so
Since that would be
I'm
interesting.
hereby declare my willingness to stay in Washington, D.C. So let me know whether there is any
Okay.
positions or fellowships that you are willing to offer. I come here and stay a couple of years, and I'll come back and answer your question with authoritative question. So
Okay, and
yeah,
I hereby declare the intention to have you as a visiting
Yeah,
fellow.
yeah, I think
But
I
we'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe one last question from the gentleman over here.
Hello, I'm Dennis Halpin. I'm a fellow at the Institute for Korean American Studies, former State Department, former House staff. I was struck, thank you, Dr. Lee, for your presentation. One thing that struck me was your explanation of the perception that China's absence in the process was the reason for the failure in Hanoi, because that I have not largely heard in Washington. In Washington, it's been explained in terms of American domestic politics. Two things. One, President Trump was jet lagged and he didn't sleep all night the night before the Hanoi summit. He was up in his hotel watching his former attorney, Michael Cohen, testify to Congress. He got no sleep, so when he didn't get the deal he wanted, he was just shimsul-jengi, and he just got into his car and took off. The second interpretation is that because he had a new national security team came in just before the Singapore summit, that was John Bolton and Secretary of State Pompeo are considered more hardline than Tillerson and McMaster. So they had time building up to Hanoi to sort of poison the well. So, and I noticed Pyongyang in their public statements afterwards have blamed more Bolton and to a less extent Pompeo and not said anything about Trump. So why is there a difference in perception in Seoul and Washington as to the non-success of the Hanoi summit?
I said that is not Seoul's perception, but China's perception. And let me just add that, there is a matter of psychology. China has, I think, this historically written, deep-rooted psychology that when it comes to Korean Peninsula issue, when it comes to North Korean issue, China has this sense that we own the narrative. North Korean matter, it's ours. We do this. You cannot solve this issue without me. So when Trump bypassed China, reached out directly to Kim Jong-un, said bilaterally with Kim Jong-un twice, China has its own reason for being slightly unhappy. And when the Hanoi summit derailed, China was, I think, a little bit, shouldn't say happy, but a little bit smoked that, see, without China's presence, without China's help, Trump, you cannot solve North Korean issue. The issue is so complex. It has a history. It has psychological factors. It has security concerns. And without China's help, you cannot solve North Korean issue. I think this is what I was trying to say.
But that is a Chinese perception. Do you think the Chinese actually possess the capability to facilitate the success of the dialogue with the United States?
I think you should ask that to Geng Shuang, the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson.
But you are the China analyst from Seoul.
I think China's influence on North Korea is both mythical and real at the same time. Real in the sense that China has real physical influence on North Korea. I mean, just imagine that it cuts off this economic, lifeline. Then, North Korea is dead tomorrow, right? But then the thing is that it's in a way it's mythical because you have these leverage, but this leverage is something that it's there, but you cannot use it in real life because the very moment that you use it, then your influence is gone because China's fear has been that when we pressures North Korea too hard and when North Korea feels cornered, just like a cornered mouse, North Korea might turn around and bite the China's hands. For example, through missile testing, even there are some concerns about North Korea's missiles now heading towards Japan or United States. Maybe the directions will turn around to the Chinese side. And some of the China analysts, they describe North Korea as a mad dog. You cannot predict where the mad dog runs toward. So they have this influence, but then they don't want to upset North Korea in so desperate degree that North Korea will turn around, become a menace to China's national interest. I think there was some gentleman over here keep raising his hand. Should we entertain?
I think we are running out of time, but feel free to stay on and pose a question to Dr. Lee. Again, thank you very much, Dr. Lee, for a very insightful and comprehensive discussion of the dynamics after the Hanoi summit. We certainly hope to host you as a visiting fellow at some point, and we'll discuss more. But thank you very much for coming today.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. It was fun.
I have a word to replace pleased in describing China's reaction to the collapse of the Hanoi summit. Pleasantly surprised.
Oh, pleasant.
Very interesting talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Hey, how are you? How are you? Yeah. New card and some cash, please.
You're still on C-SPAN. You are still on C-SPAN. Okay, now you're...
Oh, you are moved to